Hey lifers, Dustin here, and today I would like to welcome you to my new series. A few weeks ago, I got a comment from a user named Aziria, I think I'm saying that right, and he suggested, he kind of pitched the idea of, what if I started a what if college football series, and I made one about what if Notre Dame joined the Big Ten in the 1990s. Well, that is exactly what I'm here to do. Before I actually get into the video, a quick little comment. I'm actually starting this for a couple of reasons. One, I've actually already had this idea. I wanted to do this on a previous channel that I had that was about history, kind of what if histories. That was inspired by a channel called Alternate History Hub, where he talked about, offshoots of timelines, which is the terminology that I'm going to be using in these videos, and our timeline versus their timeline. It's inspired by that channel. Also, I didn't really like that there was a gap between my Tuesday and Thursday videos, so I was like, I could do a Wednesday video, and then I didn't like that there was a gap between my Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Saturday videos, so now I'm going to be doing videos every Tuesday through Saturday, so the very first Friday video will be coming out in 2 days. As for the actual content of these videos, the idea really excites me because first off, you can literally never run out of what ifs with college football. There's some, I could do what ifs just about teams in certain conferences, let alone throughout the entirety of college football. But it is going to depend a good bit on you guys. So I have a slew of them that I kind of wrote out one night, but I'm always up for suggestions. And I know that out there's a lot of conspiracy theories. There's a lot of wondering what could have happened if this team had joined this conference, or if this team had won this game, or this player had got here, or this coach hadn't retired when they did. So whenever I post these videos, let me know down below what other videos in the What If Wednesday series you guys would want to see, and I'll see what I can do about making them. Before I get into the actual video, I want to give a little bit of an anecdote. There was a girl in high school that I was head over heels for. I think for most of us, there's a girl in high school, right? At least one. And I loved her. I wanted to date her, to get to know her better and all of that. And turns out she also liked me. And we always had this weird thing. There would be, I would be ready to date her. And I'd be like, hey, let's date. And she would say, oh, I like this guy, or I'm dating this guy, or this guy already asked me, and I would be like, oh, okay. And then a few months or a year would go by, and she'd be like, hey, let's date. And I would say, oh, sorry, I'm already dating this girl, or I like this girl, or whatever. And it kind of always happened that way, and to this day, we've never dated. We've actually lost contact, and I really feel like this is the perfect analogy for Notre Dame and the Big Ten. There has been rumors for literally a century about the Irish trying to join the Big Ten, or the Big Ten trying to get the Irish in, and they just can't ever meet in the middle. They can never quite agree. These rumors have gone on for almost as long as college football. Starting in the early 1900s, supposedly Notre Dame applied for Big Ten membership numerous times and got rejected, most notably after the Big Ten kicked out Michigan for not adhering to its rules, which you would know about if you watched my History of Conference Realignment video I put out Saturday. But they never did join, and whenever the Big Ten made overtures to the Irish, they started to become really proud of their independent status, which, if you know anybody that has gone to Notre Dame, they are still extraordinarily proud of today. There's even a rumor I've seen where Notre Dame and Texas were scheduled to join the Big Ten sometime in the 1980s, but eventually turned it down, but I'm not really sure about that. The biggest rumor that I've probably heard, or the most prevalent one that I've heard over the years, is that actually Notre Dame was supposed to join the Big Ten with Penn State in the early 1990s, but eventually turned it down, and that's kind of why the Big Ten stayed at 11, right? The Big Ten was that odd 11 number throughout the 90s and into the 2000s, was because actually it was supposed to be the Irish that joined Penn State to kind of balance out the divisions, right? They would have split it up between East and West, just like it is now, and that would have been the division, and they actually would have been right there with the SEC for the very first conference championship games, but Notre Dame at the last second backed out after Penn State was already in, and thus an 11-team, awkward-looking Big Ten existed for nearly 2 decades. It's that last one that I want to take a look at in this video. So Penn State actually joined the Big Ten in all sports except for football in 1990. They joined for football in 1993. So in this timeline, we're going to have Notre Dame and Penn State both joining the Big Ten in 1993. Remember, guys, this is all my take. This is all my thoughts on it. This is a potential alternate timeline that could have happened in the college football world. As we're going through, let me know what you think about it down below. Now, the first thing that this would have affected is, of course, the fact that the Big Ten would have a conference championship game and that it would have been split into 2 divisions, probably East and West, just like it is today. So, in the Big Ten West, we would have had Minnesota, Iowa, Wisconsin, Northwestern, Illinois, and Notre Dame. And in the East, you would have had Michigan, Michigan State, Purdue, Penn State, Indiana, and Ohio State. And just like in today's Big Ten, you could argue that the East is more powerful and more crowded at the top than the West is. But in the West, you do have Notre Dame and Wisconsin and occasionally an Iowa team. And I think over time, typically divisions tend to balance out. Typically. And just like in real life, we're going to have the Big Ten championship game indoors because Big Ten country in the wintertime is rather cold. So as much as I would love to put it at something like Soldier Field, we're probably just going to put it in the RCA Dome and then later on in the Lucas Oil Stadium in Indianapolis, Indiana. This initial season of a 12-team Big Ten, which they could have gone to the Big 12. There wasn't a Big 12 at the time, but we're going to let them keep the Big Ten. So the 12-team Big Ten, the very first season in 1993 would have been a doozy. At the end of the year, you had 4 teams, including the Irish, that finished in the top 11. Obviously, this is going to have been different, considering the Irish would have played 8 Big Ten games, maybe 9, instead of the 4 they actually played in 1993. This is a Notre Dame team that beat the eventual national champion Florida State Seminoles and lost a heartbreaker in their only loss to a top 15 Boston College team. I'm going to say in this new timeline that we've made that Notre Dame wins the inaugural Big Ten West Championship in the game of the year in the Big Ten against a Wisconsin team who in real life had an easier schedule than Notre Dame did that year and lost to a Minnesota team that it probably should have beaten, even though that Badgers team tied number 3 Ohio State. Based on the way things went in our timeline, I'm going to say that Ohio State won the East. I also think that Notre Dame probably beats Ohio State, an Ohio State team that gets to the Big Ten championship game based on that tie with Wisconsin. I think Notre Dame beats that Ohio State team if you look at the times that both teams played Michigan that year. Notre Dame beat the Wolverines in the Big House earlier in the year, and at the end of the year, which you could argue they're better teams, but at the end of the year, Michigan blanked Ohio State 28-0 in the Big House. Both of these teams are extraordinarily good. Both these teams finished in the top 11 of the polls, so theoretically it could have gone either way, but I'm using that kind of as a tiebreaker. The weird and interesting thing is Notre Dame's only loss of the year was against Boston College. But if they had joined the Big Ten, they probably wouldn't have had enough room in the schedule with their traditional rivals in USC and Stanford and Navy to actually schedule that game against Boston College. There's a chance that Notre Dame would have beaten everybody they played and gone undefeated in a perfect season in their first season in the Big Ten. But we are going to not assume that. We're going to assume that since it's their only loss, that they would have found a way to keep the BC game on the schedule and they still would have lost. In which case, would they have had enough momentum at the end of the year to sneak back up into a championship game? I'm going to say no. Even if they had beaten Florida State in the regular season in 1993, the loss to BC, even if it was just by 2 points, was too much to overcome. They probably, with their loss, they can't get in a decent championship shot. They probably go on to the Cotton Bowl and finish the season ranked number 2. Here's a pretty interesting irony. So if you were to ask me, Dustin, do you want Notre Dame to join a conference? I would say, yeah, man, I'm pretty sick of this independent stuff. Now, that's based on my own personal biases towards the college football thing. I think you should but I think you should be in a conference. I think it should be promoted. You should be promoted and looked in a better light if you're in a conference and not get special permission and special advantages for not being in a conference. I think that's ridiculous, but so is the way of Notre Dame. But if you look at our timeline, Notre Dame has lost at least 3 games every year from 1994 to 2011 until the undefeated regular season of 2012. If you put the Irish in a Big Ten conference where they face more of the same teams every single year rather than just a few at a time, you're going to have to play the Penn States and the Michigans and the Michigan States and the Wisconsins. And if you're playing those teams year in and year out or every 2 or 3 years, I think your losses probably go up. Now, Notre Dame would probably have more of, in my opinion, would probably be able to recruit better being in a conference. But playing those extra teams and always having to play a tough team from the East in a Big Ten championship game probably would have cost them losses during this time. But the advantage is having the built-in games against the Illinois, the Northwesterns, the Minnesotas of the Big Ten. No offense to those teams, but more often than not, Notre Dame is probably going to win, even if there are a few upsets here and there, and it probably would have helped their win totals over the years. The funny thing about this idea of Notre Dame joining a conference is that I feel like most people in the college football world think it's going to be this transcendental moment for the sport. Like once someone conquers Notre Dame, right, conquers the independent team and brings them in, that now everything in college athletics is completely different. And I don't think that's the case. I think, honestly, on the micro level, most things stay the same. I think what's interesting is if you look at the macro level of college football, if you pull back the lens on the Big Ten Conference, how differently things would have gone. The biggest reason isn't that Notre Dame is in the conference. I'm going to say this, and it's going to annoy a lot of Notre Dame fans out there, but in my lifetime, I was born in 1989. I really started watching football in 94, 95. For a majority of my lifetime, Notre Dame has been a good to better than average team. Except for that year in 2012 when they went to the BCS championship game, they haven't really blown me away as a casual college football fan. The tradition and the lore has always been there, but as far as the last decade and a half, 2 decades, they haven't really shown me much as a football fan. What I think is the most interesting is not what the effect that Notre Dame joining the Big Ten would have on the Big Ten, but what adding a conference game a decade, 2 decades earlier would have had on the Big Ten and college football. Does Penn State go undefeated in the conference in 2004 with an extra game? What about Michigan's 1997 championship? How many Rose Bowls are different? How many Rose Bowls do the Irish go to? I think the Rose Bowl would very much like to have Notre Dame come to Pasadena. How much differently is Notre Dame's recruiting? How differently are they looked at on a national scale as part of a conference that they could eventually build up and dominate versus an independent team that can schedule kind of whoever they want based on what they feel at the moment? With that being said, I do want to say Notre Dame tends to schedule very far out. I understand that. But at the same time, if Notre Dame decides right now that in 10 years they want a little bit of an easier schedule, they can schedule the Rices and the SMUs of the world instead of the Michigans and Penn States that they would have in the Big Ten. Also, if we just took the win-loss total of Notre Dame from the 1994 season until the 2001 season, where they lost at least 3 games every single year, if we took that and applied those exact same records if they were in the Big Ten, I have 100% confidence in the entire world that the Notre Dame fan base would say, we went to the Big Ten and we started losing games. This is bullcrap. Why did we do this? Worst decision ever. People at Notre Dame would have been fired for making the decision to go to the Big Ten, even though, as we know, it would have happened regardless. Or maybe the opposite happens. Maybe Notre Dame goes in there and goes 10-2 every year and starts winning Big Ten championships, and everybody thinks it was the greatest decision of all time. And instead of having to schedule, having to craft a schedule every year, you kind of have one built in already. But this latest round of conference realignment would have had a ripple effect across the country. Now, instead of just the SEC, you have 2 conferences that have 12 members in a conference championship game. I still think the Southwest and the Big 8 combined to form the Big 12 in 1996. I'm not really sure that changes. But what would be interesting is that the ACC and the Pac-10 would have felt the exact same need in order to not be left behind, which is what we saw in the 2011 to 2013 conference realignment shift. In this new timeline, the ACC immediately adds Virginia Tech and Miami to compete with the recently unstoppable Florida State in the conference, and they also add West Virginia, all three from the Big East. Florida State does not go on to dominate the ACC for their first decade. Instead, all the newcomers come in and challenge the crown. That means that the ACC doesn't head north, at least not immediately. No Boston College. I wonder if down the road this affects Pittsburgh and Syracuse from joining the conference, and maybe in 2011 when Nebraska jumped ship to join the Big Ten, if they still decide to do that, the Big Ten decides to get Pittsburgh instead of a Maryland team that feels like it needs to jump ship too. Instead of Utah, it's BYU as the team from the Beehive State that decides to join the Pac-10, and the Pac-10 decides why not expand into a new state as well and decides to bring in Nevada. I'm not really sure this saves the Big 12 too much in the great scheme of things. I don't feel like that would have stopped the gripes that the Colorados, Nebraska, Texas A&M, and Missouri would have had, but they couldn't have immediately replaced it with West Virginia. They're in the ACC in this timeline, so they bring in Houston and TCU as the other two teams to kind of stop the bleeding a little bit. So that kind of wraps things up. That's my take on one possible alternative timeline if Notre Dame joined the Big Ten in 1993. Please let me know down below what you think. Do you think things would have changed at all? Do you think it would have just escalated and thing after thing after thing would have happened? How do you think Notre Dame would have fared in a 12-team league of a Big Ten in the 90s and early 2000s? Let me know all that down below, as well as what other what-if college football questions you want me to take a look at in possible future videos. Let me know that down below. Thank y'all so much for watching. I really appreciate it. As always, if you enjoyed this video, please make sure to give it a big thumbs up. You can also click the circle right here in order to subscribe, or watch other college football videos over there to the right. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, until next time. Hope that out there's a lot of conspiracy theories, there's a lot of wondering what could have happened if this team had joined this conference, or if this team had won this game, or this player had got here, or this coach hadn't retired when they did. So whenever I post these videos, let me know down below what other videos in the What If Wednesday series you guys would want to see, and I'll see what I can do about making them. Before I get into the actual video, I want to give a little bit of an anecdote. There was a girl in high school that I was head over heels for. I think for most of us, there's a girl in high school, right? At least one. And hey, lifers, Dustin here, and today I would like to welcome you to my new series. A few weeks ago, I got a comment from a user named Aziria. I think I'm saying that right. And he suggested, he kind of pitched the idea of, what if I started a What If college football series, and I made one about what if Notre Dame joined the Big Ten in the 1990s? Well, that is exactly what I'm here to do. Before I actually get into the video, a quick little comment. I'm actually starting this for a couple of reasons. One, I've actually already had this idea. I wanted to do this on a previous channel that I had that was about history, kind of what if histories. That was inspired by a channel called Alternate History Hub, where he talked about, offshoots of timelines, which is the terminology that I'm going to be using in these videos, and our timeline versus their timeline. It's inspired by that channel. Also, I didn't really like that there was a gap between my Tuesday and Thursday videos, so I was like, I could do a Wednesday video. And then I didn't like that there was a gap between my Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Saturday videos. So now I'm going to be doing videos every Tuesday through Saturday. So the very first Friday video will be coming out in 2 days. As for the actual content of these videos, the idea really excites me because first off, you can literally never run out of what ifs with college football. There's some, I could do what ifs just about teams in certain conferences, let alone throughout the entirety of college football. But it is going to depend a good bit on you guys. So I have a slew of them that I kind of wrote out one night, but I'm always up for suggestions, and I know I loved her. I wanted to date her, to get to know her better and all of that, and turns out she also liked me. And we always had this weird thing. There would be, I would be ready to date her, and I'd be like, hey, let's date. And she would say, oh, I like this guy, or I'm dating this guy, or this guy already asked me, and I would be like, oh, okay. And then a few months or a year would go by, and she'd be like, hey, let's date. And I would say, oh, sorry, I'm already dating this girl, or I like this girl.